Stablecoins have been in the sniper scope of regulators for quite some time, and we could now be on the brink of seeing the bullets fly. This is because US regulators have finally released their report on stablecoins, and the regulatory recommendations it contains could crush certain stablecoins if they're put in place. Today I'm going to tell you where this stablecoin report came from, what it says, which stablecoins are at risk, and what it could mean for the crypto market. I know you're excited, but going any further without a disclaimer would be short-sighted. Nothing in this video is financial advice, just so we're clear. There's only entertaining and educational content here. If you're not sure where you are, my name is Guy and I am a crypto czar. My kingdom consists of the highest quality crypto content you can find. Coins, tokens, news and reviews with maximum truth and minimal hype. If this sounds like your cup of tea, subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell. Why not? It's free. Time is money though, which is why I've left timestamps down below. You can use them to skip around or watch until the end to help this channel grow. Now that you're on board, let's dig into this stablecoin report. The report I'll be unpacking today was put together by the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, or PWG. The PWG consists of the following personnel: Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, Securities and Exchange Commissioner Chairman Gary Gensler, and Commodity Futures Trading Commissioner Chairman Rostin Behnam. The PWG was formed in 1988 as a response to the Black Monday stock market crash in 1987, which saw the Dow Jones index drop by over 22% in a matter of hours. Naturally, the PWG's purpose is to prevent stock market crashes from happening, which is why the PWG is colloquially referred to as the, quote, plunge protection team. This informal title comes from an article about the PWG written by the Washington Post in 1997, which alleges that the PWG actively buys and sells futures contracts with the help of big banks to manipulate the prices of certain assets. Evidence of the PWG's stock market intervention has been mostly circumstantial and centers around the meetings the PWG has had during stock market crashes over the last 2 decades. Following these meetings, it was typical for the stock market to see a reversal, and many traders swear they've seen the plunge protection team in action on the price charts during these relief rallies. The fact that the contents of the PWG's meetings are not public and their recommendations are only ever discussed with the President of the United States has kept this would-be conspiracy alive. Now keep this context in mind when we sift through the PWG's stablecoin report a little later on. Although the PWG Stablecoin Report was only recently released, it's been in the works since December last year, when the PWG issued an initial statement about regulatory issues pertaining to, quote, certain stablecoins. This 4-page statement contains a few interesting things that are worth pointing out. First, quote, depending on its design and other factors, a stablecoin may constitute a security, commodity, or derivative subject to the US federal securities, commodity, and/or derivatives laws. This is interesting because it's the same confusing statement that's been attributed to SEC Chairman Gary Gensler, even though he only became chairman of the SEC in April this year. Second, quote, US dollar-backed stablecoin arrangements should hold high-quality US dollar-denominated assets, hold these assets at US regulated entities, utilize multiple custodians, and secure investments with high-quality obligors. This is also a talking point that's believed to be relatively new among regulators. Third, quote, stablecoin arrangements should have the capability to obtain and verify the identity of all transacting parties, including for those using unhosted wallets. Now this opens the door to the possibility that anyone holding a centralized stablecoin, such as USDC, in their crypto wallet could see it frozen until they complete KYC on the issuer's platform, in this case, Circle. This is something I've warned about for quite some time, and it's why I've personally parked some of my dry powder in Tether's UST. Now you can learn more about Tether by using that link in the top right. Despite the fact that the PWG's attitudes towards stablecoin regulations have been known since December, the crypto industry didn't react until Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen announced in July that the PWG would be issuing recommendations for stablecoin regulations in the coming months. Following this announcement, we saw a series of crypto projects prepare for a possible crackdown. For starters, MakerDAO announced it would be dissolving its foundation to become fully decentralized. For those who don't know, MakerDAO makes it possible to mint DAI, a decentralized stablecoin that's collateralized by other cryptocurrencies, including the USDC stablecoin. More on that in a moment. And speaking of USDC, Circle revealed the reserve assets backing USDC less than 5 days after the PWG's announcement. BUSD and USDP issuer Paxos responded in kind less than 24 hours later, and it flexed on the fact that its stablecoins are backed by cash and cash equivalents such as government bonds, aka government debt. Now, I'll quickly point out that Paxos is the only stablecoin issuer with federal insurance. This will be relevant later on. Tether, on the other hand, promised a full audit of its own reserves, which it had revealed in March as part of a settlement agreement with New York's Attorney General. Those of you who watched my video about the assets backing the biggest stablecoins will remember that USDT is backed mostly by commercial paper, aka corporate debt. In August, Circle announced that it was planning to become a digital bank, which would make it subject to banking regulations, including the implementation of federal insurance. At the end of August, Circle announced it would be changing the composition of its USDC reserves to include only cash and cash equivalents, such as US Treasuries, aka government debt. In September, an unnamed source at the Treasury Department said a crackdown on stablecoins was coming. In October, another insider reported that regulators were looking to subject stablecoin issuers to the same regulations as banks. Circle also revealed that it had been cooperating with an investigation by the SEC, which had begun back in July, and Tether revealed that it was hit with a $41 million fine by the CFTC. Note that both the SEC and CFTC are part of the PWG, a blizzard of acronyms indeed. In addition, the IMF warned that some stablecoins could pose a risk to the financial system because of how they're backed, and Fitch Ratings followed suit with its own stablecoin warning. In the middle of this madness, Terra's Luna coin began hitting new all-time highs, almost certainly due to the demand for UST. At the end of October, it was revealed that Terra's founder, Do Kwon, had been served by the SEC in September. Do Kwon and Terraform Labs subsequently sued the SEC back, which is pretty crazy, and well done them, I say. Earlier this month, ETH became the primary collateral for the DAI stablecoin, a title that had historically been held by USDC. While this might not be anything more than traders who are bullish on ETH minting DAI for additional leverage, it might also be an intentional move by market participants to reduce DAI's reliance on USDC. This barely scratches the surface of all the crazy stablecoin-related news that came out after the PWG's July announcement, and you can keep up with these kinds of crypto headlines by watching my weekly crypto review. The latest episode is up there in the top right. This brings me to the PWG's Stablecoin Report, which was made public on November the 1st. Note that this report was written with the assistance of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the Federal Insurance Deposit Corporation. This means that every major financial regulator in the United States is involved with this initiative. The PWG Stablecoin Report begins with a brief summary, and a few things stuck out to me here. First, quote, digital asset trading platforms and other market participants play a key role in providing access to stablecoins and liquidity in the market for stablecoins. This suggests that the PWG could go after centralized exchanges as part of its stablecoin crackdown, something which SEC Chairman Gary Gensler has alluded to many times in the past. Second, quote, Treasury will continue leading efforts at the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, to encourage countries to implement international AML/CFT standards and pursue additional resources to support supervision of domestic AML/CFT regulations. This confirms the suspicions I had in my recent video about the FATF's finalized crypto recommendations, specifically that the Treasury is the primary driver of the FATF's anti-crypto push. Third, quote, disruptions to the payment chain that allows stablecoins to be transferred among users could lead to a loss of payments efficiency and safety and undermine the functioning of the broader economy. This seems to imply that peer-to-peer stablecoin transactions are seen as a threat to the current financial system, which is odd until you consider the fourth statement that stuck out to me. Quote, "This report focuses on analysing prudential risks posed by stablecoins used as a means of payment and provides recommendations for addressing these gaps." The second footnote elaborates with, quote, "This report does not provide recommendations regarding issues or risks under the federal securities laws or the Commodity Exchange Act, CEA, as they pertain to any digital assets, digital asset trading platforms, DeFi, stablecoins, or stablecoin arrangements." Now, this is extremely important because it suggests that the PWG doesn't really care about stablecoins so long as they aren't competing directly with central bank digital currencies in the payment space. A sixth sentence of interest also seems to solve another mystery. Quote, "Stablecoins are often, although not always, characterized by a promise or expectation that the stablecoin can be redeemed on a one-to-one basis for fiat currency." This ties into the supposed securities designation of some stablecoins, because the SEC might interpret this as being a sort of investment contract, even though there is no expectation of profits per se. You can learn more about what makes a cryptocurrency a security by watching any of my videos about the SEC's lawsuit against Ripple. You can find the most recent one up there in the top right. Surprisingly, the PWG demands that, quote, "Congress act promptly to enact legislation to ensure that payment stablecoins and payment stablecoin arrangements are subject to a federal prudential framework on a consistent and comprehensive basis." I see this as the PWG passing the hot potato of stablecoin regulations to politicians, which is a peculiar play to say the least. That said, the PWG specifies that, quote, "In the absence of congressional action, which is urgently needed to address the prudential risks inherent in payment stablecoins, the agencies recommend that the Financial Stability Oversight Council consider steps available to it to address the risks outlined in this report." For the sake of simplicity, you can think of the Financial Stability Oversight Council as being analogous to the PWG, except it's not as exclusive and not as secretive. The final part of the summary worth pointing out is, quote, "While the scope of this report is limited to stablecoins, work on digital assets and other innovations related to cryptographic and distributed ledger technology is ongoing throughout the administration. I take this as a sign that we can expect to see more reports like this coming from the PWG in the future." The second part of the PWG Stablecoin Report breaks down how stablecoins work. Now, this is stuff we're all familiar with, so I won't bore you with the details, but I will point a few things out. First, quote, "There are no standards regarding the composition of stablecoin reserve assets, and the information made publicly available regarding the issuer's reserve assets is not consistent across stablecoin arrangements as to either its content or the frequency of its release. This is true, though it's debatable as to whether regulations are the solution to this problem. Competition between stablecoin issuers should weed out the less transparent issuers over time, but there's much to be said about the monopolies existing stablecoin issuers have." Second, quote, "Other stablecoin issuers reported hold riskier reserve assets, including commercial paper, corporate and municipal bonds, and other digital assets." This is a not-so-subtle reference to Tether, and it's one of many such references in the report. Third, quote, "Depending on design, however, permissioned blockchains may also offer less transparency and security. I take this as a nod to the fact that public smart contract blockchains, namely Ethereum, are significantly more secure than their private equivalents, such as Quorum." Fourth, quote, "Risk of fraud or instances of error are governed by state and federal laws, and within the boundaries of these laws, transparent rules governing participation in the payment network may provide for allocation of loss more generally with respect to participating financial institutions." This is said in the context of traditional payments, and the PWG seems to be arguing that crypto is lawless, when it's actually governed by immutable computer code, in most cases anyhow. Fifth, quote, "Industry measures for the size of DeFi participation, although unverified, include the percentage of stablecoins that are locked in Ethereum smart contracts. This is where MakerDAO comes in. If you look up the largest holders of USDC on Ethereum, most of these are DeFi protocols, and the largest at 7.5% is the USDC contract to mint the DAI stablecoin on MakerDAO. Last, but certainly not least, quote, risks resulting from unique aspects of distributed ledger-based arrangements, including governance issues. I had a knee-jerk reaction when I read this sentence because it relates to the environmental, social, and governance concerns institutional investors have about cryptocurrency. As I mentioned in my video about ESG and cryptocurrency, institutional investors take issue with the decentralized nature of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, because there's no CEO or board of directors that can be brought to heel. Now, you must watch that video if you haven't already, and it'll be in the description. The third part of the PWG Stablecoin Report details the economic risks and regulatory gaps associated with stablecoins. The first is the risk of stablecoin runs. This is when everyone holding a stablecoin rushes to try and redeem it for dollars at the same time. To meet this dollar demand, the stablecoin issuer would have to sell the assets they're holding for dollars to give to their users. Recall that the biggest stablecoins are mostly backed by debt. Now, funnily enough, the PWG doesn't seem to care about whether stablecoin holders get their dollars back or not. They're more concerned with the effects mass sell-offs of the assets backing those stablecoins could have on the market. For example, if USDC is backed by a basket of the biggest stocks, the billions of dollars of sell pressure that would come from a USDC bank run could be enough to crash the stock market. Even though the market caps of the biggest stocks are in the trillions, billions of dollars of sell pressure in a short amount of time could be enough to take a few percentage points off. This would liquidate the over-leveraged traders holding these stocks, causing the price to fall further, triggering more liquidations, and so on. This avalanche crash happens in cryptocurrency all the time, and some traders argue that the absence of this avalanche effect in stock market futures is evidence of the plunge protection team at work. In any case, I reckon this is a reasonable concern to have about stablecoins. The second risk the PWG sees with stablecoins relates to payments, and the only concern with any credibility is the one that stablecoins operate 24/7, whereas stablecoin issuers work from 9 to 5. This could create some serious issues related to payment disputes and settlements. The third stablecoin risk relates to the centralization of power and system risk. Regarding this centralization of power, quote, the combination of a stablecoin issuer or wallet provider and a commercial firm could lead to an excessive concentration of economic power. That is clearly code for Facebook's Libra, aka Diem. But as I mentioned earlier, I reckon there are some very real risks around the centralization of power with centralized stablecoins, even just by definition. Regarding systemic risk, quote, if insured depository institutions lose retail deposits to stablecoins, and the reserve assets that back stablecoins do not support credit creation, the aggregate growth of stablecoins could increase borrowing costs and impair credit availability in the real economy. This is an ironic statement given that the Bank for International Settlements admitted in its recent report about central bank digital currencies that a CBDC would have exactly this effect on borrowing costs and credit availability. What's even more ironic is that this report was co-authored by the Federal Reserve, which is part of the PWG. And you can learn more about that crazy report by following the link up there in the top right. I'll also add that an economy that depends on the creation of credit is not a healthy one, in case that wasn't clear enough already. When it comes to regulatory gaps, the PWG only provides a single paragraph, which can be summed up as, this stablecoin stuff is hard to make regulations for because it's too complex and innovative. Well, to paraphrase a famous phrase from one of my favourite films, you're a regulator, deal with it. The fourth and final part of the PWG's Stablecoin Report lays out the specific regulations the PWG wants to see for stablecoins. First and foremost, quote, the recommendations presented below are focused on the prudential risks identified with respect to payment stablecoins. In terms of specifics, quote, legislation should limit stablecoin issuance and related activities of redemption and maintenance of reserve assets to entities that are insured depository institutions. The legislation would prohibit other entities from issuing payment stablecoins. As I mentioned earlier, the only federally insured stablecoin issuer is currently Paxos, and Circle will soon be following suit. Tether, on the other hand, will not be able to meet this requirement, which adds credence to the idea that USDT is the only stablecoin that's really at risk here. Then we get this peculiar statement. Quote, "Insured depository institutions include both state and federally chartered banks and savings associations, which have access to emergency liquidity and Federal Reserve services." I'll just add that to the circumstantial evidence pile for the plunge protection team. Next, quote, "Insured depository institutions that issue stablecoins would be subject to supervision and regulation at the depository institution level by a federal banking agency and consolidated supervision and regulation by the Federal Reserve at the holding company level." This sounds like the Federal Reserve will work closely with stablecoin issuers, something which Circle explicitly mentioned that it intends to do as part of its plan to become a bank. If I had my tinfoil hat, I'd tell you that USDC is preparing to become a CBDC. More about that in the description. Anyways, unfortunately for centralized crypto finance, quote, "Such oversight should include authority to restrict stablecoin service providers from lending customer stablecoins." This means non-bank lenders like BlockFi and Celsius could be shut down by these stablecoin regulations if they're passed, and it's clear the backlash has already begun for these kinds of crypto companies. What is especially concerning is, quote, "Congress should provide the federal supervisor of a stablecoin issuer with the authority to require any entity that performs activities critical to the functioning of the stablecoin arrangement to meet appropriate risk management standards." This is a problem because cryptocurrency blockchains and cryptocurrency wallets arguably play a critical role in the function of stablecoins. They probably won't, but I wouldn't underestimate the ignorance of some of the politicians who will be putting together these regulations. After all, one of them did demand that the government should have the power to reverse Bitcoin transactions. Not surprisingly, the PWG also specifies that politicians should, quote, "require stablecoin issuers to comply with activities restrictions that limit affiliation with commercial entities." This means we won't be seeing Facebook's DM stablecoin anytime soon. Oh dear, how sad, never mind. The PWG then repeats the warning in the introduction about the Financial Stability Oversight Council stepping in if politicians don't, and I couldn't help but notice an interesting footnote. Quote, "The Council also has authority to designate non-bank financial institutions as systemically important financial institutions, SIFIs, pursuant to its authority in Title I of the Dodd-Frank Act." For those unfamiliar, the Dodd-Frank Act was introduced following the 2008 financial crisis and basically brings financial institutions deemed to be systemically important under the wing of the Federal Reserve. Plunge Protection Team or Stablecoin CBDC. Take your pick. The PWG then spends 3 pages talking about the FATF's recommendations and how stablecoin issuers need to adhere to them. A few highlights include, quote, "Mass adoption of a well-regulated and supervised stablecoin with strong AML/CFT protections built into the stablecoin could provide greater transparency into illicit financial activity and could mitigate ML/TF risks. Put simply, KYC built into stablecoins." Also, quote, "Stablecoin addresses and transactions on public blockchains can be paired with information, if available, that can enable regulators and law enforcement to identify address owners. In other words, wallet addresses holding stablecoins will be tracked and logged." And finally, quote, "As a result of the recent publication of the FATF standards, the FATF will now redouble its efforts on effective implementation of the standards on digital assets by member countries, and the United States will continue to support these efforts at the FATF and engage bilaterally to encourage countries to meet these standards. TLDR, a global crypto crackdown is coming." The last page of the PWG Stablecoin Report directs to another stablecoin report by the Financial Stability Board, or FSB, whose purpose is pretty self-explanatory: protect the existing financial system. The FSB's Stablecoin Report is from October 2020, and it's titled, quote, "Regulation, Supervision and Oversight of Global Stablecoin Arrangements." Note that global stablecoin means cryptocurrency stablecoins with global reach, not some dystopian global currency, though I'm sure there's something to that effect in other documents I've yet to discover. The FSB specifies that, quote, at a national level, establishment or, as necessary, adjustment of regulatory, supervisory and oversight frameworks consistent with the FSB recommendations and international standards and guidance by July 2022. Translation: a global crackdown on stablecoins is coming in the first half of next year. Mark your calendars. Now, if you're thinking that the PWG Stablecoin regulation recommendations don't sound nearly as bad as they've been made out to be, you can thank the participants noted in the appendix of the report. This list includes the Blockchain Association and Coin Center, both of whom have done an amazing job at swaying the opinions of politicians when it comes to cryptocurrency regulations. In case you missed the memo, crypto advocacy groups have been making a lot of noise on Capitol Hill, and this leads me to believe that stablecoin regulations won't be so bad when all is said and done. However, this assumes that politicians in Congress will act in a timely manner, because otherwise the Financial Stability Oversight Council will step in, and this could result in much more heavy-handed regulation. What frustrates me is that the PWG didn't give politicians a specific deadline after which it would step in, and to me, this means that it could do this any time it wanted. You could argue they've already begun with how aggressively they've been going after crypto projects lately. Tether is especially high up on its hit list, and though Tether has somehow managed to dodge every bullet it's fired so far, it will be the first stablecoin issuer to take a hit. Now, on paper, USDT kicking the bucket would crash the crypto market. In practice, though, we could simply see a migration to more robust stablecoins, and you could argue that this has already begun as well. Terra's UST is the fastest growing stablecoin, and even USDC has been growing at a faster rate than USDT in percentage terms. This means that the crypto market could probably absorb the shock of an all-out attack on USDT, but this obviously wouldn't look pretty in the short term. To my mind, the only real long-term risk in the PWG stablecoin regulation recommendations is the possibility of KYC for all wallets holding centralized stablecoins. Even though I've speculated about this happening for a long time, this is the first time I see concrete evidence of this intention coming from regulators, and I can't say I'm surprised. What is surprising, though, is how keen regulators are to integrate stablecoins, so long as they're not used for payments. Now, all my concerns could be null and void simply because the PWG specifies that payment stablecoins are what they take issue with, at least in this context. As ever, we'll just have to see what happens next and hedge ourselves accordingly. If you found this video informative, let me know by hitting that like button. If you plan on coming again, subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell. If you're already up to date with the videos on this channel, check out Coin Bureau Clips for behind the scenes and original flicks. If you've watched all of my Clips videos too, you should know that you can find me off of YouTube. I'm active on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram and Telegram too. If you're getting wrecked by the crypto market, my weekly newsletter is what you need. If you're short on style, head on over to the Coin Bureau merch store to get a sweater, hoodie, tee or all three. You can find these resources and many more in the description down below. Thanks so much for staying the course. More videos are on their way, all made with Coin Bureau's secret sauce.